Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. And Happy New Year. It's our very first time live after the New Year's. And I always prioritize those days when I really have something to say, aside from just contributing to the noise. Because what I feel is, happening very often when we have such controversial news and we have such a big weekend with the whole thing about Venezuela and today about Ukraine, and everybody keeps repeating the same noise, and henceforth we create more noise. And so, with yesterday, I was thinking, what can I really contribute? And then today, I actually found out, and that's what we will be talking today mainly. So, of course, we will be talking about the actual news as far as we come to it. I'm aiming to, tame this whole broadcast at about an hour, because longer than that, I mean, I bet you have better things to do. And I also want to tell you that everything that I will be discussing today will be sent to you in written form. So if you're subscribed to Honest Network or Honest newsletters, they're free. You will be getting this. So if you're not subscribed, please do so you will get all the information. So I know a lot of you, or some of you at least, like to take notes, and I've seen some of you taking notes, and I appreciate it. But just know, do what's best for you, but just know that you will get all this information sent to you. And what we focus on today, and this will have a deep dive. So if you're a fan of our Honest Plus deep dives, this is sort of a bonus version, because I feel it is very important today to discuss what is actually what. And so we'll focus on three main points. First, Venezuela after Maduro. So also, who is Maduro? Who is his wife? Why is she being sued as well? And who is now this new interim leader? Delcy Rodriguez, who is she, what's her background and whatnot, why is she actually staying in power, and also what is the connection between Venezuela, Iran, China, and Russia, and why is she staying, who advocated for her. Then we're going to talk about Ukraine peace dilemma, right? We have the big, highly promoted Paris Agreement today. I have the exact text, and so I'll read it out to you, and then we'll analyze together how feasible that is, and also something that really is not being reported enough. I feel like that during that press conference, and I'll have the clips for you, Steve Witkoff, U.S. envoy to Russia and Ukraine, has mentioned BlackRock, and that BlackRock will be overseeing the reconstruction of Ukraine. And so I will share what I can share at the moment about that. And if you listen carefully, I guess you will understand me more than what I vocally share. Okay, so hi, Tidy Whitey. Hello, hello. Hi, Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Okay, so those three topics, and then whatever we cover from the actual news, our global, and of course there's Iran, of course there's other countries, all 193, and something happens everywhere. And we have also national news, and today is January 6th. So I want us to take a moment to remember those who have passed on January 6th, because now current President Trump sent the coup essentially to our capital, who tried to take over the power. And innocent people, those who just showed up to their work, doing their jobs, law enforcement officers, have passed either on that day or later. We're not going to discuss circumstances, but this was a deadly attack, and I want us to remember it as such. And also, I want us to focus that about a year ago, 1600, people were released and pardoned by President Trump, who were, based on whole investigation, facing time. They were literally in jail for their actions, and premeditated actions, but they were pardoned. And they're partially utilized for ICE now and as well. So, but I really want us to kind of, it's a somber occasion, but do not forget January 6th, because January 6th was sort of a face reveal, if you will. So let's talk about the topics today. So Venezuela, right? So there's U.S. pressure, there's regional silence, and there's new interim government. So first, latest news on that. Now, yesterday in the newsletter, I covered everything that happened with Maduro and what went on throughout the day and all that. Right? We had a very turbulent weekend, if you may. But all those details are there. Also, the reaction, that global reaction, right? Some were in favor, some were opposed. The legal problem with all this in yesterday's newsletter. It's free. Again, please go read it. It will take you about 5 minutes. Now, the duly elected leader of Venezuela, Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize and then somehow wanted to use that Nobel Peace Prize to get Trump. But ultimately, she accepted the Nobel Peace Prize while mentioning that he deserves it. But she did not give him the Nobel Peace Prize, which he used against her. So essentially, she's away from government, even though Maduro has been overthrown. And any logical person would have thought that, well, she will be the one taking over the power, right? Because her and Gonzalez, they won the election, but somehow she is nowhere to be found, nor she has even spoken to President Trump. And so yesterday she was on Fox News, and I'm not going to embarrass her this much to show you that video, but essentially this was she finally said, I will share Nobel Peace Prize with Trump. I will not give it to him because she found out it's illegal, it's not possible because she already accepted it and blah blah blah, but she wants to share it with him. At this point, Trump is saying, well, you didn't give it to me, then whatever, right? So that's so far to that. So the legitimately elected team, right, Machado and Gonzalez, who were interested in actually bringing democracy to Venezuela, they're not being considered to be even part of any kind of government. Okay, so this is important to note here. Also, Venezuela expects the partial U.S. blockade of oil tankers to reduce national oil production by roughly 70% this year. Now, why does it matter? This is the part that is connected to the saying that President Trump, by the way, I have no videos of him, and he had a whole hoopla talking to GOP members today. I covered it on Substack, whatever. If you like it, go read it. I'm not going to waste time on this. Now, when he says Cuba is going to fall very soon, Cuba is getting oil from Venezuela, is very dependent, yada yada. I mean, it doesn't, today he said it doesn't require any military action because it will fall soon. Let's just give it time. This is the part of the blockade. This is the result of this blockade that Ukraine, that US is now imposing on Venezuela. So 70% down, on their production, right, on oil tankers. Secretary of State Rubio said that the blockade provides, quote, leverage that will continue to be in place until we see changes, unquote. The leverage on Cuba, Colombia, and the region. That is what they're playing with. Okay, now Cuba said that at least 32 of 80 people killed during the U.S. incursion were members of its armed forces and interior ministry. So now we're talking about killing, of course, civilians and innocents, right? Because they bombed. I mean, they essentially, if you look at what U.S. did, they truly followed Russia's path when Russia conducted the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, now 4 years ago almost. And what they did there, right? They wanted to take over Kiev and they wanted to get Zelensky. And so what they did, before bombing the military facilities and the presidential area, they also bombed the airports, right, with everything that's supposed to be at the airports. Now, what Ukraine did, they brought the planes up, and so that's how they pretty much, Russia failed to take over Kiev. But we're not going to dive into that. Now, exactly the opposite was the result here with Venezuela. Maduro lived on a military base, equivalent of Pentagon. So without somebody on the inside being infiltrated by U.S. Prior, very difficult to imagine that this all could be conducted. But what U.S. did factually, it did bomb the airspace, the airports, and the surrounding area, and so as a result, civilians have died. But also, what we're learning now is that yes, Cubans are known for protecting Venezuela's leaders. Starts with Hugo Chavez, who did not trust Venezuelan, the domestic protection force. He was they called it paranoia. Now I guess it's realistic. He was fearing the takeover of United States and invasion. Now, so they have Cuban law enforcement, so to speak, hired and protecting the leaders. Now, 32 of those 80 who passed in Venezuela were Cubans. Now we're learning that yes, those were members of armed forces, but also interior ministry. So if we think about the interior ministry of Venezuela, now we're talking about diplomats and the administration. So who died as a result of this strike from Venezuela's administration? Why is this question not raised by the current interim president? Those are very valid questions and never, asked as a follow-up anywhere. Now, the casualties underscore how heavily Maduro relied on Cuban agents for personal protection. Responding to this, Trump, speaking at the GOP event that he hosted at the Kennedy Center today, he said essentially, this was so great, but unfortunately, a bunch of people died, but mostly Cubans. Oops, sorry. And he mentioned 150 died, but luckily Cubans. And this was the first time he sort of gives a number, but the number is not right. And then he says 150 planes that were up and a bunch of Cubans died, right? But what we need here is clarity. How many people died? Were there civilians? How many people were hurt on our side? Because they mentioned that our forces were injured. How? Right? Because in one report, we've heard that one helicopter was damaged, but it continued to fly. Now, what was the damage, right? Anyway, kind of interesting. Now, China and Russia condemned the capture of Maduro, but stopped short of threatening to defend Venezuela militarily. Despite their long-standing alignment with Caracas, neither signaled concrete action. Trump's might makes right, and it's very interesting because the latest deep dive I've done was on December 30th, where in response to predicting 2026, I said, well, might makes right. This is what we're hitting into, and I feel it's connected to UN Charter. Now, and this was my prediction, that UN Charter will be challenged. Now, my understanding at that point that the challenge will come through those referendums in Ukraine, Cyprus story, right, with Turkey, the Somaliland in Somalia, Taiwan in terms of China, right, there. So territory-wise, sovereignty will be challenged. Now, what U.S. did, also part of the same UN Charter, is not invading sovereign states to fix their problems, right? So essentially, we infiltrated Venezuela. We took away their sovereign leader because we think he's not supposed to be the leader. We brought him on our soil, and now we prosecute him based on our laws because we say he did something against our country. See a very big stretch here all over. Now, also, if you look at the case against Maduro, it mentioned that they're charging him for imports into America. Supposed to say exports, actually, because what are they charging him for? The fact that America bought from him, assuming he was selling whatever he was selling. That's not a legitimate claim. Supposed to say experts. Also, why this whole case works. And I need to pull up Trump's tweet here. Just give me a second. I did not pull it up here, but I need to pull it up there so I can quote it. Okay, so, and let me send it to computer so I can pull it up. The whole case against Maduro, right? And as I mentioned, he's a sovereign leader. And it's not really up to us to decide, right? Yes, he lost the election and he decided to stay, nevertheless, that he lost. But the problem here is that we don't really have the jurisdiction to intervene into domestic issues of a government, of a country, right? Because what if, other countries would have said, Trump didn't win legally or whatever. What do you estimate China coming in, kidnapping Trump and prosecuting him in Beijing? That's a very big stretch of imagination. But the only way that U.S. attempts to persecute Maduro is by claiming that he's not a legitimate leader and he was not duly elected. Now, what helps the case is that during Biden administration, the US government stated that they're not recognizing him as a legitimate leader. Also, EU countries have not recognized him as legitimate leader. But China, Iran, Russia were dealing with him, right? Russia had the whole 10-year unconditional support type of agreement, right? Now we see how that showed. But the only claim here that allows for this whole thing to happen is that he is not leader, right? Because if he is a leader, if he is a president, then he must have immunity. He must have a diplomatic immunity. So regardless what you think he has done wrong against your country or whoever country, immunity does prohibit you from prosecuting him. The big thing that Maduro's side is now using, right, and the case is set before March 17th, and I'm doing my best to be in the courtroom now to report it for you, while other reporters will be writing books about it. So I need an insight. So, but what hurts this whole case is that the way Trump announced the capture of Maduro. And here's the tweet. The United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be news conference. So, Venezuela and its leader, President Maduro. So, this is the big leverage that is now given to Maduro's team to present this as a valid reason for the claim of diplomatic immunity. So we'll see how this goes. We'll see if it comes down to the trial or whatnot. But I just want to point out some things here. Okay. So we're talking about China and Russia, right? Trump's might makes right foreign policy approach may now serve as a precedent for their own ambitions elsewhere, right? So now we showed that this works. And so China, Iran, Russia, whoever can use this as a reason to pursue their interests. Okay, so yesterday, their ambassadors, alongside Iran's, attended the inauguration of this interim president, right, Delcy Rodriguez. And they were at the inauguration. And I want you just to pay attention to how it went down, right? So first, she greets the ambassador of China, then Russia and Iran. Take a look. As you see here, right? China, Russia, something, whatever, Iran. So to say that they do not really agree with her being there, I mean, vividly, it's not that true. Now, following closed-door briefing by the Trump administration on the Venezuela operation, which lawmakers say they were not informed of in advance, the GOP leader stated, quote, that Bondi Access gave us all explanation needed on Venezuela, which is not for public consumption. And then the question is why it is not for public consumption. They also said Maduro's wife is being held not as an accomplice, but as part of a broader investigation. Now, actually, she is mentioned in the lawsuit, not just as an accomplice or somebody as part of a big investigation. There are actually charges against her. Now, which led me to the idea of doing a whole deep dive on who is who. Okay, so let me pull up my deep dive. Now, Venezuela after Maduro. Who holds power and why? Russia, Iran, China, oil, and gold matter. Now, here's part of our deep dive. Now, why this whole thing matters. Venezuela's leadership crisis is not just about succession in Caracas. It's about whether the sanctions-era survival system that Maduro has built through oil, gold, and strategic partnerships with Russia, Iran, and China, the big three that you just saw on the video, can continue to function. This is the big question here. Now, with Nicolas Maduro now in U.S. custody, the question is no longer theoretical, it's practical. Who can keep the state running and how? Now, of course, what happened? Following U.S. operation that captured Maduro in early January, Venezuela's Supreme Court, still controlled by Chavismo, moved quickly to preserve continuity. Delcy Rodriguez, long-serving vice president and chief international negotiator, was elevated to act as interim president. The transition was swift and tightly managed, and by the way, may I add, not disturbed by United States at all. So, on one hand, right, let's pause here. We're capturing Maduro. We're saying that's it, right? Will be democracy. Everybody celebrate, okay? Have science, celebrate. People have been freed in Venezuela. Were they? No. It's essentially what happened is sort of type of an impeachment, illegal impeachment, right? So they lost president, but everybody else jumped up a level, and the government is same. Everything is same. Partnerships are same. Yeah, nothing has changed. So the question is, was that planned? Yes, it was. On Friday, Honest Plus Deep Dive, I'm going to give you timestamps when it was agreed with Delcy Rodriguez, supported by verified sources. But at this point, let's focus on the big picture here. So the goal was clear: prevent institutional collapse, reassure foreign partners, and keep economic channels open, right? Now, who is Delcy Rodriguez? Delcy Ilona Rodriguez Gomez is a Venezuelan lawyer and veteran political operator from Caracas. She has been one of the most powerful figures inside the Chavista system for more than a decade. Now, mind you, when Maduro came into politics from being bus driver, he came in, he advocated for Hugo Chavez. That's how he came into politics. This was his way. He's not coming from a big political company or, drug overlords for that matter. Now, meanwhile, Delcy Rodriguez served as vice president since 2018, foreign minister from 2014 to 2017, minister of communication and information, and before that, senior figure in the pro-government Constituent Assembly. She's a key overseer of finance and oil portfolios, which leads us to the idea that she is the one who negotiated and closed all the deals with China, Iran, Russia. So, internationally, Rodriguez is known as a disciplined defender of the Chavista project and has been sanctioned by multiple Western governments for her role in democratic erosion and repression. Her authority does not come from popular legitimacy. It comes from institutional control, loyalty within the ruling elite, and credibility with foreign partners who kept Venezuela afloat during years of sanctions. Now, as to her political roots, Rodriguez comes from a deeply ideological leftist family, not a criminal dynasty. Also, if you're US based, disconnect from your beliefs, left, right, center. Completely not connected to what we have here, okay? Now, her father, Jorge Antonio Rodriguez, was a 1970s guerrilla leader and founder of the Socialist League. He was arrested in connection with the kidnapping of U.S. businessmen and later died in custody amid allegations of torture. Now, his death became a formative myth inside Chavista politics and also has driven Delcy Rodriguez to be playing an active part in it. Now, her brother, Jorge Rodriguez, is one of the most powerful figures in the country, a former vice president, former mayor of Caracas, and current head of National Assembly. These ties place Delcy Rodriguez firmly inside the core political lineage of Chavismo. Now, other cartel links? No verified evidence exists that Delcy Rodriguez is personally involved in drug trafficking, runs cartel, or is illegally impacted in the international narcotics case. Hence, she's not mentioned in the case against Maduro and his close circle. But in terms of leadership, she is as illegitimate, if you call them illegitimate, right? They lost the election, decided to stay nevertheless. She is not legitimate in that case, as much illegitimate as Maduro is, nor it is brought up or challenged. Now, claims sometimes circulate online linking her to so-called Cartel of the Suns, an alleged network involving elements of the Venezuelan military. Maduro lived on a military base. However, such claims remain unproven with respect to Rodriguez herself. Okay, nothing is proven, everything is alleged at this sense. This distinction matters. Political alignment is not the same as criminal indictment. Now, next, let's see who is Celia Flores, right? And this is the wife of Maduro. Hello, Charita Tot. Hi, hello. Patrick is here. Hello, Patrick. Okay, so who is Celia Flores, the wife of Maduro? Because we constantly refer to her Maduro's wife, right? So here's the story behind it. Again, Maduro, bus driver, comes, gets motivated to be part of politics, goes defends Hugo Chavez, all that, right? Now, her story. Celia Flores, Nicolas Maduro's wife, is a lawyer and longtime Chavista power broker in her own right. She rose to prominence in the 1990s after serving as part of the legal team that defended Hugo Chavez following the failed 1992 coup attempt. She played a key role in securing Chavez's release from the prison in 1994, the moment that cemented the movement that would later take power. During that period, she met Maduro, who was also campaigning for Chavez's freedom and working within his inner circle or security circle. At this point, she already had three small children. He had a son on his own, but they sort of got together. Flores later became president of the National Assembly and remained one of the most influential figures behind the scenes throughout Maduro's rule. Now, there is a story in the case of Narco Sobrinos. If you speak Spanish, you kind of can understand where I'm headed. So, 2015, two of Celia Flores' nephews, Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Franqui Francisco Flores de Freitas, were arrested in the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration sting operation. They were charged with conspiring to smuggle approximately 800 kilograms of cocaine into the United States. In 2016, a New York jury found both men guilty. Evidence presented in court included recorded conversations discussing the use of Venezuela's presidential airport facilities for drug shipments. In 2017, they were each sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, US-based. Prosecutors argued that proceeds from the drug operation were intended to support political ambitions and help maintain the family's grip on power. In October 2022, both nephews were released as part of high-profile prisoner exchange that secured the return of several Americans detained in Venezuela. This was done by President Biden, 2022. This case does not legally prove that Celia Flores herself ran drug operations, but it does place the president's immediate family circle inside major proven narcotics conspiracy, a fact that has shaped international persecutions of the regime. Now, Venezuela's external survival system, right? We talked about them surviving while being sanctioned. And those sanctions lead to them operating the illegal businesses, right? Until China, Iran, and Russia come in and say, hey, let's buy oil. We are sanctioned too. Let's survive together. Hi, Michael. Hey, hello. Okay, so survival system. For years, Venezuela survived isolation by building a pragmatic network with three key partners, each serving a different function. First, China. It's a financial backbone. China's role has centered on oil-backed loans, infrastructure financing, and long-term leverage. Venezuela borrowed heavily from China over the years, repaying much of that debt in oil rather than cash. Beijing has avoided overt political interference, but it cares deeply about three things. First, repayment. Second, stability. And third, continuity of state-to-state agreements. For that reason, Beijing was really in favor of her staying in power, Rodriguez staying in power, because change of the government would mean for them renegotiation of all those agreements. Bring in diplomatically oriented and democratically oriented Machado and elimination of sanctions. Beijing is suddenly operating a very different foothold, if you know what I mean. Now, China is cautious. It does not gamble on chaos, but it does not abandon partners lightly either. Now, there are unverified claims circulating as recent as an hour ago. In parallel, claims have circulated on social media suggesting that China is preparing to transfer missiles, air defense systems, and drones to Venezuela to escort Chinese oil tankers following Delcy Rodriguez's assumption of the interim presidency. Remember, we started with U.S. blockade, reducing oil output by 70%. So this would align with China willing to combat this. At present, there is no confirmation of these claims from major international media outlet governments or independent defense analysts. Okay? So just to put it up, let's treat it as a rumor at this point. No evidence has emerged of actual weapons transfers, deployment orders, or naval escort operations. If this happens, I'll tell you. What is confirmed, though, that China has politically condemned U.S. actions in Venezuela and reiterated its support for Venezuelan sovereignty, while maintaining economic interests tied to oil shipments. Now, whether Beijing is willing to escalate from diplomatic backing to direct military involvement remains unclear. Any such move would represent significant escalation and would almost certainly trigger wider international response. So essentially, they are then at war with US, and US is dragging NATO into it. Because if US will call for Article 5, all NATO members will not veto it. They'll come to aid because they're trying to please Trump, right? As a narrative. Now, if they would trigger Article 5 against Russia, different. Okay? So, speaking of Russia, second partner, Russia, oil logistics and geopolitical shield. Russia has played a critical role in helping Venezuela move oil, manage energy logistics, and withstand diplomatic pressure. Its involvement has included three things. First, facilitating oil trading under sanctions pressure, providing diplomatic cover, and supporting security and military cooperation. Now, Russia views Venezuela as a strategic foothold in the Western Hemisphere and Delcy Rodriguez as a reliable operator who understands how to keep channels open under stress. So again, very favored by China, very favored by Russia. Third, Iran, sanctions survival partner. Iran's relationship with Venezuela has focused on fuel, refinery assistance, and logistical know-how. So, when Venezuela's refining system collapsed and fuel shortages hit, Iran stepped in with gas shipments, refinery inputs, and technical assistance. So, they're not just pledging allegiance and being friendly, hubby-dubby, with Venezuela. They're actually helping. They're standing up and standing for Venezuela. Now, this partnership is transactional, not ideological. It's about one sanctioned state helping another function when conventional systems fail. So, before we talk about the gold reserves, I just want to mention here, if US intended, and I'm not judging based on rumors or whatever, President Trump today talked about common sense. So let's use it. If you think about it, the US goes into a country, captures, abducts, whatever you guys want to refer to, the leader, claims he's illegitimate, so he doesn't have diplomatic immunity. We're going to prosecute him in our home based on our laws. Okay. To do what? You want to put legitimate leader, like with Ukraine. They say, well, Zelensky overstayed his welcome. There is a war by Ukraine's constitution. The elections are henceforth suspended. So instead of pushing Russia for ceasefire so Ukraine can hold elections, they push Ukraine to do illegitimate or some illegal type of referendum during war. To do what? So Zelensky will be legitimate and elected. Okay, here you said this guy is illegitimate. We took him out, literally took him out, but we left every part of a legitimate government in, and now we're just dealing with them and say, hey, those are the best case scenario. So you, again, common sense, you wanted to deal with Cecile Rodriguez, or whatever her name is, the Cecile Flores is the Maduro's wife, Delcy Rodriguez. You wanted to deal with her. She's favored by China, Iran, and Russia. So whenever they say we need Venezuela because they're dealing with China and Russia and we want to kick them out, so we own our hemisphere, in your steps and in your deeds, you are doing exactly the opposite. Is now US sharing part of that deal? Maybe. But if you think about it, to combat that, if you want to take this military operation as an option and you think this is legal, which is a question for another time, it does violate international law. So, but if you do take the sovereign leader out, you should be replacing the government. You should be that world police that puts democratic government in. Hence, it would lead to elimination of sanctions. So country can be prosper and grow and, have legitimate partners, do legitimate business, and would have less need for narco trafficking and all this type of story. Right? Common sense. But we do see something very different. Now, let's talk about gold. It's the hidden pillar. So, when oil reserves are disrupted and banking channels tighten, gold becomes a critical fallback asset. Right? Venezuela holds gold reserves both domestically and abroad. Control over these reserves and the ability to sell, certify, and move gold has become the central question of legitimacy. Gold has allowed Venezuela to generate liquidity, bypass traditional financial systems, and trade when banking access is restricted. So, this also does exist because of sanctions. Why sanctions? Because the government is not democratic and the leader is not legitimate. Yes? Okay. But gold also draws scrutiny. Disputes over who controls it are likely to intensify in any prolonged power struggle. So, where do they keep the gold? First, inside Venezuela, primary location today. Also, today, RT, Russia Today, spread rumors that United States sent C-17 the cargo planes to get the gold out of Venezuela has been combated by all the fact checkers. This is not true. In fact, our C-17s went to the Middle East. Now, Central Bank of Venezuela vaults in Caracas, those hold the majority of this gold. After 2018, Hugo Chavez ordered the repatriation of gold that had been stored abroad, moving the bulk of it back into the country to reduce exposure to foreign seizure. Now, United Kingdom, specifically Bank of England, has a disputed portion. Significant portion of its gold, Venezuela's gold, about 31 tons, has been held at the Bank of England. This gold became the subject of prolonged legal battle after the UK government recognized Juan Guaido, not Maduro, as Venezuela's legitimate leader. As a result, the gold has remained frozen and inaccessible to Maduro's government. Now, the gold extracted domestically, not all reserves. Venezuela also has large gold deposits, particularly in the Orinoco mining arc, but much of this gold is illegally mined. Some is smuggled abroad, often through neighboring countries. Some is used directly for off-the-books transactions. Think about Wagner Group. There's a big conspiracy there. But here we're sticking to not conspiracies, facts, so let's stick to it. And bypassing formal reserves. Now, why this matters now? Gold has been a key financial lifeline for the Venezuelan state amid sanctions. Control over gold equals access to liquidity when banking channels are restricted. Frozen foreign held gold has become geopolitical pressure point, not just financial one. Okay? So, now how Venezuela used gold to bypass sanctions and why London is so important. As US and international sanctions progressively cut Venezuela off the global banking, the Maduro government increasingly turned to physical gold as substitute for cash and formal financial channels. So, strategy worked because gold does not require SWIFT or corresponding bank transactions, can be physically transported, and can be exchanged directly for fuel, food, weapons, or cash. So think about like back in the day. Is this how we make Venezuela great again? Next, they're gonna, use stones instead of money. In practice, Venezuela extracted gold domestically, much of it from Orinoco mining arc, moved gold abroad via trusted intermediaries, and traded gold directly with foreign partners to secure imports and political support. So, gold shipments were reportedly sent to countries such as Turkey and United Arab Emirates outside traditional transparency mechanisms. So remember, I did a deep dive on Shadow Fleet. This is their Shadow Fleet. This allowed Caracas to keep the state functioning even as oil revenues and dollar access collapsed. Gold also became a tool of elite patronage, used to reward loyal military units, political allies, and foreign partners when salaries and budgets could no longer be paid conventionally. So you see how many people are benefiting off of it, how many countries. This is part of their budgets. So the same story with Ukraine, right? And ceasefire and ending the war. So many countries are being part of the Shadow Fleet and making a bank on it by either being literally those who run the transportation or being so so-called hubs that are repackaging and deflagging, reflagging those cargo. So here you have also a system. So before sanctions intensified, Venezuela stored large portion of its gold reserves in Bank of England, a common practice for central banks. London matters, of course, because the world's most important gold trading hub. Gold held there can be quickly sold or pledged as collateral, and custody of the Bank of England signals international legitimacy. And the legitimacy became the problem itself. So at this point, when UK recognized legitimately elected leader, not Maduro, Venezuela's legitimate leader, um, as a result, British courts ruled that Maduro government could not access gold stored in London. Roughly 31 tons remain frozen there. This is a very important part of this whole thing. This decision transformed Venezuela's gold from a financial asset into geopolitical lever. Maduro lost access to one of his last international recognized reserves. London became pressure point rather than safe haven, and the case set a precedent, of course, for other political recognition and how they can override financial custody norms. Right? So, gold in Caracas, usable, but there's not enough of it because some is illegitimately mined, some is restricted. Gold in London, secure but politically frozen. Okay, so this is their gold. Let me here. Patrick says common sense seems really hard to find those days, unfortunately, right? Right. Common sense is not that common. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing the stream. Michael says, what was the asset you said Russia was holding for Venezuela? I thought it was gold. Yes, in St. Petersburg. And officially, it's not documented. Unofficially, Russia has been paid with gold, especially their Wagner group, the mercenaries that helped Maduro contain the public in the previous election cycle when he was not seen as legitimate either. So Wagner stepped in and helped, and so then the gold reserve or part of this was transferred to St. Petersburg. Again, this is all not officially recorded. Okay, so now, what is there political axis, right, between Russia, Iran, and China? Yes, but not a conspiracy type of thing. It's pragmatic. It's alignment of sanctioned or semi-sanctioned states, right? Each benefiting each other, helping each other to survive. So China provides financial financing and patience. Russia provides oil pathways and protection. Iran provides sanctions, survival expertise. Delcy Rodriguez is not the architect of a global bloc. She is the operator keeping these relationships functional. And by the way, she was the one closing those deals, right? She's a very key figure to keep this axis, right, if you will, working. Now, what is not proven? There is no verified evidence that Rodriguez is personally controlled by Russia, China, or Iran, but okay. She runs intelligence operations of foreign states, not proven that she has family ties to foreign security services or that she was charged or indicted for narco-terrorism or cartel leadership, and we see it, she's not part of the case. Much online speculation collapses geopolitical alignment into criminal conspiracy. Serious journalism should not. Okay? So, bottom line here. Rodriguez, Venezuela's most experienced international operator, far beyond Maduro, by the way, a sanctions area negotiator whose role is to keep the state functioning under extreme pressure. Her ties to Russia, Iran, and China are state level, strategic, and transactional, and all are, so to speak, in the open. Now, what is behind the scenes is behind the scenes. But the main takeaway that I want us to draw from all this is that for whatever United States has done with Maduro, it can be analyzed as something more rather personal to take him, specifically his wife and her family that has a very big footing in Venezuela, rather than to take the entire administration and the government or to change how things work for Venezuela, right? As I mentioned, if democracy were to be brought in, the sanctions would have been lifted, the gold in London would have been unfrozen. And most importantly, China, Iran, and Russia would have been negotiating. So, who is benefiting from this? Because now she's acting, you know, as a president, of course, and she has been um, sworn in as interim president. But what's the point here? Now, timestamps as to when she agreed with the US to do this whole thing, it starts previous year, of course, from the summer on, presented to you on Friday. Now, let's talk about the other part, Ukraine, Paris, and the peace that Russia projects. We also have a bit of a reply from Putin. It's, of course, in Putin's style via video. But altogether, today, coalition of the willing, right, including United States, represented by Witkoff and Kushner, unelected, unofficial Kushner, Witkoff, who has a status of an envoy. They met first with Zelensky and then Ukrainian delegation in Paris. So Zelensky met with Macron first, then with Witkoff and Kushner, and then with the coalition itself together. So ahead of the full group session, Zelensky held the bilats. Yeah. So the most significant outcome was the signing of the letter of intent by Britain and France to deploy forces to ensure lasting peace following a ceasefire. Now, most important takeaway here, assuming such ceasefire is agreed with Russia. Mind you, Russia has stated on different levels, from Putin to his aides, that it will not accept any agreement that involves any foreign forces deployment. So here is sort of this catch-22, right? The stronger and more concrete the security guarantees offered by partners, the less likely Russia is accepting them. So I want to present this full Paris Agreement. Yes, touted as the biggest, today's the biggest day for Ukraine, historic, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay, my question is this. All right, you have Ukraine fighting Russia. You have Ukraine's partners, so to speak. Let's count Witkoff and Kushner as partners, whatever. I see them as interstate agents, if you will. But, okay. Partners agreed with the victim how to support them. But you need the aggressor to stop torturing Ukraine. It's like, okay, in the case of rape, right? Don't ban me, YouTube or whatever. Somebody is a victim, somebody is the aggressor. And so you say, okay, once the victim stops abusing, once the aggressor stops abusing the victim is going to go to the hospital, going to get the treatment. We agreed on one type of treatment, and it will be so great, and it will be this, and it will be that. It will be fantastic. It's going to be a single room in the hospital, and we agreed on all that. But at this point, the aggressor keeps harassing the victim. It keeps raping it. What do we care what the room will be in the hospital and how everything will be fantastic, and you're going to get, a very cushy towel? What do we care? Ukrainians are being killed daily. They continue to be killed daily. Connected to the story of Maduro, right? We can talk about Venezuela being now democratic and they got rid of Maduro and let's have flowers and balloons. Let's march on the street. Nothing changed for them except for the change in face of their leader. That's it. At some point, we have to call a thing, and we have to stop pretending that we're not understanding. Because you know what I fear? The distance between, or the difference, right? A little tiny, separation between pretending and actually believing and acting is very tiny. This border, right? Is very, very tiny. We can pretend so far and we start believing this bullshit. Because that's exactly what it is. What are we talking about? Oh, there will be French and British forces in Ukraine once full peace is agreed. Do you think if this peace is half-ass, French and British forces will be marching there? If you think if Baltic states are attacked and NATO is involved, Britain and France will have even an idea that they will be marching? Do you think if China will start defending Venezuela and US pulls others through Article 5 out of Europe, they will have capacity to even think about Ukraine? Entertain me better. Now, text, okay? So, Paris Declaration. The members of the Coalition of the Willing, Ukraine and the United States, have convened today in Paris. We all stressed our commitment to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with United Nations Charter principles and welcomed the progress achieved, including in the discussions between the Americans, Ukrainians, European, and other partners. In particular, the coalition of other partners means Canada. Could have mentioned. Okay. In particular, the coalition was clear that Ukraine's ability to defend itself is critically important for ensuring the future of Ukraine's and Euro-Atlantic collective security. We confirmed that ensuring the sovereignty and lasting security of Ukraine shall be the integral part of peace agreement, and that any settlement will have to be backed up by robust security guarantees for Ukraine. They really love this word robust. It's the same slogan as we heard during the Biden era. It was, we'll stand with Ukraine all the way. Right? Now it's robust guarantees. Okay. We stand ready to commit to a system of politically and legally binding guarantees that will be activated once a ceasefire enters into force. In addition to bilateral security agreements, here's your key, and in accordance with our respective legal and constitutional arrangements. Come closer. 3 ways to veto this, yeah? And also, this is a letter of intent. Budapest Memorandum is a letter of intent. Maybe we should be just defending what the hell we signed already years ago. Same Britain, same France, same Russia, same freaking Ukraine. Okay, never mind. 3 things for all this to happen. 3 things. First, ceasefire activated, entered into force, not agreed to, not Putin wouldn't mind. It's activated. In simple terms, shit stops flying. Next, bilateral security agreements. So Ukraine would need to agree on something with France. Will France get something for it? Who knows? With Britain, with everybody who's standing in, for it, and with the United States, most importantly, too. There will be one-on-one agreements. This is whatever the Paris Agreement is, a letter of intent. This is not, think about real life. This is not proposal to be married. Married is the legal agreement. Proposal is sort of like, I'm going to give you jewelry. Let's hope for the best. No, this is meeting parents. That's the stage. I'm meeting parents. I'm showing that I'm kind of sort of interested if everything falls into place. That's where we at. Okay? So, ceasefire is activated. Bilateral agreements, one-on-one, are closed. Not one binding, a bilateral. So, France can step out when it wants to. Britain can step out when it wants to. US can stop this when it wants to, without the binding multilateralism that they all have been fighting for at least a year. Also, that a settlement, right? They also add the third part here. This settlement with Ukraine will have to be backed up by robust security. It has to be in accordance with our respective legal and constitutional agreements, meaning, in simple words, has to be verified by the Senate in the United States. Same story in Britain, same story in France. Okay. They will include the following components. Now, this is what they would need to agree to. First, participation in a proposed US-led ceasefire, monitoring and verification mechanism. There will be continuous, reliable ceasefire monitoring system, including contributions from members of the Coalition of the Willing. The Coalition of the Willing will also be represented in the special commission that will be established to address any breaches, attribute responsibility, and determine remedies. So, if pro-Russian US government is controlling ceasefire and Russia says Ukraine violated it, so we need to start bombing it, what do you think is going to happen? Second point, support for the armed forces of Ukraine. The coalition agreed to continue critical long term military assistance and armament of the armed forces of Ukraine to ensure their sustained capability, as they will remain the first line of defense and deterrence. So, Ukrainian forces are first in line. So, if there's any breach, they're dying. Good. Not good, but that's what I'm reading. This will include, but not be limited to, long term defense packages, support for financing the purchase of weapons, continued cooperation. Now, support for financing the purchase of weapons. Not we're buying them for you, not this will be some type of a fund. We will be supporting you in buying those weapons. To what percentage? We don't know. Gives you a way out. Now, access to defense depots capable of rapid enforcement and practical support in building defensive fortifications. Okay, good. Third point, multinational force for Ukraine made up of contributors from willing nations within the coalition framework. So there's coalition of the willing, and in that coalition are willing nations. Okay. A lot of willing. Okay. Supporting the rebuilding of Ukraine's armed forces and deterrence. Reassurance measures in the air, at sea, on land would be implemented strictly at Ukraine's request, following a credible cessation of hostilities. These efforts would be European led, with non European participation and proposed US support. Okay, so US is out. Binding commitments in the event of future Russian aggression. Commitments may include the use of military capabilities, intelligence, and logical support. The word that's holding this whole thing is may include. May include. This is a letter of intent where we may include. Okay. Fourth also, if something is breached, there will be additional sanctions. Okay. Fifth, long-term defense cooperation, including training, joint defense production, and intelligence cooperation. Which, by the way, Europe and both U.S. are really benefiting from, because Ukraine is far more advanced now at this point when it comes to drones and also intelligence and the operations that Ukraine has been conducting inside Russia. A U.S.-Ukraine coalition coordination cell will be established at the coalition operational headquarters in Paris. Okay, there's a lot of bureaucracy. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. First, let's quickly stop here, talk about Greenland. Trump is saying that he has to take over Greenland as part of our national security. Okay. EU leaders issued a statement encouraging collective US-European defense of Greenland amid repeated comments by President Trump about taking over the territory of national security for national security reasons. The statement outlined Europe's planned investments in Greenland, countering Trump's earlier claims that Denmark isn't doing enough. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen rejected Trump's threats, warning that a U.S. invasion of Greenland would mark the end of NATO. Today, leaders from 7 NATO countries released a joint statement affirming that, quote, it is for Denmark and Greenland and them only to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland, end quote. Following the meeting, Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand wrote on X, quote, I will be in Nuuk in the coming weeks to officially open Canada's consulate and mark a concrete step in strengthening our engagement in support of Denmark's sovereignty and territorial integrity, including Greenland. Also, unreported, completely off the radar, what also happened in global economy? Have you heard about the 15% tax? No? Nearly 150 countries agreed to exempt large U.S. multinational firms from the international 15% minimum corporate tax. The Trump administration pushed for the carve-out from OECD brokered deal. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called the exemption, quote, a historic victory in preserving U.S. sovereignty, end quote. So they also waived all tax. Trump calls it tariff, okay, on U.S. big companies. As a joke, Microsoft has used a picture of Greenland for their home screens today. Whatever joke that is. Coming to moments. Now let's get into the Paris thing. I want to show you three videos. Three videos, tiny deep dive there on BlackRock, and I'll let you go and go into the sunset. And you will have all the actual news of today in written format. Okay, good. Friedrich Merz, of course, the Chancellor of Germany, said that Germany will take responsibility for security of Ukraine and the entire continent as a whole, assuming there is a ceasefire. So let's hear what he had to say.
Schließen dabei grundsätzlich nichts aus. Deutschland ist schon heute im vierten Jahr des Krieges stärkster Unterstützer der Ukraine. Es wird auch nach einem Waffenstillstand eine deutsche Verantwortung für die Sicherheit der Ukraine und damit für die gemeinsame europäische Sicherheit geben. Wir haben heute darüber beraten, wie
Weird translation. Okay, literally said what I repeated before. Germany is accepting the responsibility for securing the continent. I would like to know details here. Okay. Prime Minister Starmer of the UK said we're closer to peace than ever, but the hardest yards are ahead. Compare it to, again, the proposal idea. You met the parents, you signal that you have your intentions. Yeah, well, two things left, propose and get married. But those are sort of the key things here. Let's listen in.
It's important that we're starting the year like this. European and American allies, side by side with President Zelensky, standing for peace. And we are closer to that goal than ever. But of course, the hardest yards are still ahead. So we're here today to keep driving that effort forward. And we've had a very constructive meeting, which is built on the excellent progress made in negotiations over recent days and weeks. The purpose of the Coalition of the Willing is to help deliver a peace that can last and to work with the US to guarantee Ukraine's security for the long term. This work is now more advanced than ever. Today's joint declaration set that out in clear terms. On top of that, and alongside President Zelensky and President Macron, we went even further today. We signed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term.
Okay, good. Let's see it as a positive, as he mentioned, visually. Great. We're beginning the year. Everybody stands next to Zelensky. Everybody's hugging. Everybody's doing something they call historic, signing a letter of intent. Good. Visually appealing. Practically, okay. Something, again, not really reported, was stated by now representative of the United States. And it's very interesting. It kind of shows you what type of respect this whole thing gets, because you have leaders, heads of state, and from the United States you have Witkoff and Kushner. That's the level that President Trump personally treats this whole gathering as. Now, Steve Witkoff said that they're close to completing a prosperity agreement for Ukraine, working with BlackRock and Larry Fink, adding that it would be very, very important for the people of Ukraine. And then I have a deep dive. Take a listen.
We think we're largely finished with security protocols, which are important so that the people of Ukraine know that when this ends, it ends forever. But we also think, critically, that we are very, very close to finishing up as robust a prosperity agreement as any country has ever seen coming out of conflicts like this. It will aspirationally mean large, large possibilities for the Ukrainian people, for people coming home from war who will find wonderful jobs out there. We're working with BlackRock, Larry Fink in this endeavor, and we think it's going to be very, very important for the people of Ukraine. And we believe that a robust economy correlates and works directly with these security protocols. It makes Ukraine a strong, independent nation, and we think that's really important in terms of the long-term future.
Oh, interesting how Sky News hid Kushner behind that yellow thing. Now, while details remain limited, all I can share with you today. BlackRock's involvement in Ukraine appears focused on economic reconstruction planning, not direct control of immediate funding. According to public statements and reporting, BlackRock, led by Larry Fink, is working with US and Ukrainian officials to help design a post-war recovery and investment framework. He's designing the entire economy of Ukraine. It's not investment into rebuilding one thing. The stated aim is to make Ukraine's economy investable once a ceasefire or peace agreement is in place. At this stage, BlackRock's role is understood to include advising on how to structure large-scale investment vehicles, helping attract private and institutional capital, and supporting planning for reconstruction in sectors such as infrastructure, energy, and industry. There is no publicly disclosed finalized deal and no announced funding amounts, because it's not going to be funding amounts. They're literally becoming as the overlord. And no confirmed list of projects tied to BlackRock at this time. Steve Witkoff's reference to forthcoming prosperity agreement likely refers to a broader framework, pairing security guarantees with an economic roadmap intended to support jobs, rebuilding long-term stability, blah. Now, however, we need to note that this approach obviously carries a risk. First of all, BlackRock is the company that monetizes chaos. Ukraine's long-term recovery will depend not only on attracting capital, but on who controls strategic assets and on what terms. Entrusting reconstruction planning, particularly involving natural resources, energy infrastructure, or critical industries, to a global asset manager whose business model centers on monetizing volatility and large-scale crises, raises concerns about sovereignty, transparency, and long-term dependency. Without strong public oversight, democratic safeguards, and clear limits on asset control, reconstruction could shift from national recovery to external extraction, trading wartime survival for peacetime leverage. Think about Ariel and her willingness to walk. Well, okay. That's the deep dive for now. I'll keep an eye on this. You get your footstep. You don't get your footstep. You get your timestamps. I was trying to research food stamps and what was canceled out on January 1st today. So that's on the back of my mind. You get your timestamps on Venezuela background deal arrangements on Friday. And again, your quick national news, global news are coming in the newsletter, so please read it. There is news from CDC, there is news from Syria and Kim Jong-un and Iran that offers now citizens to go home and stop protesting for $7 each. Okay. Israeli strikes in Lebanon. Netanyahu facing criticism over his proposal for October 7 investigative commission. There's Central African Republic, where the president won a third term after constitutional changes eliminated term limits. And Swiss officials talking about this horrible killing of 40 people in the bar during New Year's Eve. So all of that and more is in the newsletter. I don't want to bombard you with this. We're 1 minute and 9 seconds in, which I think is a good way to stop right here. The US thinks money fixes everything. Right. Might makes right. Might could be military, could be financially, economically, could be anything. But what we do see, right? We think about the letter of intent. Okay. We can talk about whatever. And the statement on Greenland, great. Physically, 150 nations today dropped 15% minimum. So everything, including the minimum, bare minimum tax on the biggest US companies. And may I remind you, on the annual report, December 30th, I did it. Please rewatch it if you haven't, where I reported that 10 richest people in the US added to their wealth, untaxed, 700 billion with a B dollars. Meanwhile, entire UN ask for humanitarian efforts this year is 23 billion, down from 40 something plus because they didn't even get it. Now, And these people running the biggest company, exactly these people here today, got the minimum taxation dropped worldwide. So I leave you here. Hey, Bradley, don't trust Witkoff and Kushner. Let Ukraine decide its future. Exactly. I agree. U.S. companies are sticking into American. Yeah, and this is a very good point. Bradley, you say that, we are in such affordability crisis here. People lost insurance. People lost all type of help. Speaking of food stamps, um, since January 1st, today is just January 6th, many of them haven't even realized what happened to them. Many of them elected this administration alongside, of course, with president. And now we're starting wars. Wars cost money. And we talk about oil and whatever. Okay, great. I mean, I understand Venezuela has the biggest oil, but even if we were to monetize it, but it will require resources and investment and time and patience. Who will be getting those profits? You and I? No. Is your tax dropped in 150 countries? No. If you, as a small business, want to sell something in France, you will be taxed. If Amazon wants to sell something in France, they won't. And this is what the world showed United States today. 3 days after US abducted a sovereign leader that they did not agree that she's not supposed to be a leader. Question for another day. Two truths can exist at the same time. I want to stretch your mind this far. Maduro, bad guy, not supposed to be there, illegitimate, good. Bad, right? And the way he was taken out is illegitimate, is illegal, goes against international law, and worse, sends an example to others that this is okay. And 3 days later, the country that done it got tax waived for its richest people who support the ballroom projects slash bunker slash whatever that is data center. Don't always follow the money, but also watch what they do, not what they say. We can talk about intentions of coalitions and willing and schmilling and good. If that makes you happier, great. Ukrainians, 12 years into this war, I don't know how entertaining that is. Not for me, at least. Bradley says Republicans like Rubio state that Arizona have been impacting America's healthcare rates since 2015. Republicans do not care about laws when they are in charge. Yeah, I mean, it's story for another day about US law that offers so many gray zones that you can pivot it to your advantage, which is really foundation of it. But altogether, and I'm not that person, totally not, who would say, let's focus on the US, let's forget other countries. I report on geopolitical news and global affairs, of course, investing in other countries instead of pulling money out of those countries, Africa, Latin America, Europe, right, everywhere, makes us isolated. Isolation leads to poverty. We cannot go America first / America alone and be prosperous. We cannot violate trust and lose the trust of our allies and think that they will still be purchasing and whatnot. At some point, they will say enough. At this point, they're still entertaining our, demands, put it this way. But at some point, they will not be able to entertain. Think about if you're in a relationship with a person you really wholeheartedly love, but they're so egoistic and they're so caring just about themselves at your cost. You will be entertaining it for some time, but at some point you will run out of F's to give. And this is my fear for our allies. At some point they will run out of F's to give. They will align with our adversaries because they have to align with somebody, and then we're there. So that's the question here. As an army veteran, says Bradley, I believe we gave Ukraine our word. What is our word worth? Exactly. And to your point, we already have a letter of intent called Budapest Memorandum that was transactional. Yes, it wasn't legal. It wasn't ratified by Congress. That's why Zelensky says this time it has to go through Congress. Okay, good. But we asked Ukraine to give up nuclear ability for our protection in return. So maybe instead of finding new coalitions and closing new agreements, maybe we should defend the laws that allowed us to be plus minus peaceful for 80 years. Again, real time example, you got married, you have your certificate, it's a marriage. It's not in 1 or 2 or 3 years to say, hey, everybody cheated. Let's re-agree our arrangement here. You have a marriage, you have a certificate. That's what you go. Are you divorcing? You're divorcing and then renegotiating? What is happening here? Why we are violating the rules that we created, having learned as a result of World War I and World War II, the rules that defend us. As I mentioned last time, you don't invest in your immune system, it cannot protect you. So, we'll see where we go from there. But again, actual news are headed your way. Bradley, thank you. Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you who watched here. I don't want to be, the deliverer of bad news, but I always pay attention to actual factual news so you can make better decisions. And please eliminate noise. So much noise altogether everywhere. Everybody talks. Everybody focuses on speaking instead of listening. Hence, the new 193 project that is beginning as well. Patrick says, thanks, Olga, for your insights, explanations, current events. Really appreciate your work. Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thanks for your hard work. Thank you, Michael. Mike, thank you. Thank you. And I guess it's from Canada. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Keep your head on a swivel. I'll be live tomorrow. I'm attending a meeting on the economic preview by Bridgewater, right? That's part of the BlackRock or affiliated in some way. So I guess we'll get more details on this shenanigans. All right. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.